Sorry, I gotta do this. I don't mean this to be an American military or American, flag waving thing. But these guys, even later that night, decided to go, well, I wonder what the American flag sounds like. All right, now take a look at this, right? Count the number of stripes. And at some point, we're gonna run all the data from the bottom to the top. Now, imagine what that's gonna sound like. Ready? Sounds just like that flag, right? Sounds just like that flag, right? The little top note is red, the low note is white, and when you get up to the blue, you start throwing the blues and the stars in. Let's do it again, it's pretty fun. Oh, if I can get it. Seven white stripes. That's pretty cool, isn't it? You learning anything yet? I hope not. So, data doesn't help us do anything. But that's all we've got when we digitize. We just got a pile of data, right? So what we have to do is turn it back into audio. So how do you turn audio, how do you turn a square wave back into analog audio? Something that's not a square wave. Well, you just do the reverse, don't you? Let me see where I am here. Yep. I'm not ready to go here yet. You do the reverse of what makes a square wave. So what makes a square wave is the fundamental, plus a lower of the third, lower of the fifth, lower of the seventh, lower of the ninth, lower of the 11th, and ad infinitum. How do you get rid of all of those? How do you get rid of all of those harmonics? You put a low pass filter on the output of the CD player at 20 kilohertz, ramp it down 24 dB per octave, and you miss the third, the fifth. So when you subtract all of those out of a square wave, what do you wind up with? Analog audio, right? It's actually really simple the way it's done, but there's a lot more complexities to it than that. So every output of every digital device is taking data and doing a smoothing filter on the output to take any harmonics, and it just depends upon the sampling rate that it was in at, and at what frequency, just above the Nyquist frequency, do we need to place that frequency filter, low pass filter, okay? And we're not done with problems, because what if we are frequency, our sampling rate is 40 kilohertz, and we get a signal in there that's 22 kilohertz, right? We can get 22 kilohertz in there. So here's what happens with that. When you sample at 20 kilohertz, and you have a frequency that's 22 kilohertz, so that the width of this wavelength is shorter than the width of the sampling rate frequency, right? See that? So we're still sampling it, but we're not sampling it twice. We're sampling it less than twice. And when you play that back, it starts out as a frequency higher than our Nyquist frequency. When you play it back, it comes back as a frequency lower than the Nyquist frequency. Does that make sense? So here's where we measured it on this interval. Now we plot that one, and you can see that the wavelength is now actually longer than the sampling frequency. And that's called an alias frequency. It just happens. alias frequency, where the output is a longer wavelength, and so it's dropping down in frequency and messing up the original part of our recording. And anytime we mess up the original, change it in any way, we call that distortion. So we are distorting simply by digitizing. Why would I want to take a perfectly good analog signal and do that to it? I wish he was in there. Well, so what we'd have to do then is to not let that frequency in. So we would need an anti-aliasing frequency that's at the same frequency as the smoothing filter on the output, but we have to put that filter on the input before we record. So we don't let that frequency in, and therefore the aliasing can't happen. Make sense? So you can calculate that, and I make my students calculate it, but I'm not going to make you calculate it. We're not done, because all we've done so far is sample. How much time do I have? Am I running slow or fast? Anybody know? Okay. So quantization is the process of measuring the amplitude of the signal every time we sample it. So we're not only sampling, we have to measure. So quantization has to do with how we can account the amplitude of the signal. Okay? So here's a sampling interval against a part of the sine wave. And you'll notice that as it crosses certain places, we got a pretty good sampling method. But as we are in between samples, this part of the line right here, the analog line, is not getting represented by the digital representation, right? And this crazy looking little thing is simply the difference between the actual measurement and its estimation. And so right here it's good, right? We measured it right dead nuts on right there. But as we move up the analog waveform, until we sample it again, we get this huge amount of error. That's called quantization error. And the only thing that you can do to prevent that is to quantize more frequently, right? So this you already know. We'll see how that changes the quantization error way down, right? Because now we're sampling it many more times. But we still have a whole bunch of crap in here that is not representative of this analog signal. Why would we want to do this to a perfectly good analog signal? I ask you? Okay, so the only thing that we can do to help to do that is two things. Raise the bit depth, or raise the quantization interval. Talk a little bit more about that. Or we can do something called dithering. So here are a couple of very simple little slides. So here's our sine wave. Here's our 2-bit quantization level. And as we are crossing here, everything seems to be kind of good. We're measuring it, and it's apparently rounding up, right? Instead of rounding down. So it's rounding up to 0.11. And here's our output of the digital signal for this, right? And this is rounding up to 0. So we're not getting anywhere down here. And then this signal, which is actually below this one level here, is not getting digitized at all. It's just not even breaking the threshold to get a quantization number, right? So what dither does is add just a little bit of noise to the signal, which pushes it up just enough to hit the threshold and get a decent sampling, or down to the threshold to get a decent sampling. And so this just sort of shows you that this signal is better than that signal because we've got dither in it, right? But what are we doing when we add dither? Anything that's not anything of the original signal is added what? Distortion, right? So we're distorting it. Why would you want to take a perfectly good analog signal and do this to it? I really wish you was here. Okay, so here's a better way to look at it. So we have this signal here, and we are measuring its amplitude at various different places, and we're measuring it at various different intervals. So here's the sampling rate, and here's the quantization level. The only way to make this signal better in places like this, and this, and this, and this, and this, is to increase our sampling rate and increase our quantization interval. The only thing you can do. So we've gone from 8-bit to 16-bit to 24-bit to 32-bit to 32 floating bit. And then we've gone from 44.1 to what, 96, 92 to 196. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. Okay? So that's all you can do. But what happens when digital audio goes bad? Can you hear it? I want to just play one example just as an example. And this one I think I have to search for and find, so you may have to give me just a second to find it. Here's what we're going to listen to. We're going to listen to one recording at CD quality, 16-bit 44.1. Another one at 16-bit 8 kilohertz sampling rate. And another one at 8-bit depth and 44.1 kilohertz. Okay? So what I want you to do is listen to the CD quality first, then listen to what happens to the next one when our sampling rate goes down, and then listen to the next one when the bit level goes down. Okay? I gotta get out of this, get on my favorite program of all time. I gotta figure out which ones these are. Okay, I forgot to make one audio track 2. One audio track 2. All right, this is the first one, which is CD quality. Okay? Just for reference, okay? This is from West Side Story. Nice crispy, nice high-end, nice trails, and you can hear the reverb trails in it, all that kind of stuff, right? Now we're going to go listen to it, same bit depth, but we're only going to sample it at half the rate, sampling at 8 kilohertz. That's enough to hear the difference, right? So what did we lose? Yeah, we lost almost all the high end. Because, so there's two things going on actually. One is we actually have alias frequencies getting in now because, and we also have a problem of where the filter is. To filter out all those anti-aliasing frequencies, right? But primarily what we heard was a complete lack of representation of anything above 8 kilohertz. Right? So all the sizzle of the cymbal, all the finger snapping, all the trails are gone. Right? Now let's do one more, and we're going to listen to at 8-bit depth, but still pump the sampling rate up to 44.1. Sounds like a new production then. What type of error is that? It's not aliasing, it's quantization error, right? So we're not able to represent any of those amplitudes. We're sampling enough, but we can't represent those amplitudes. I mean, even which is short enough, right? Pretty heavy on the frequency, but we can't even get that. So all we're hearing in between there is all of that noise. Pretty straightforward. So which is better? If we're going to increase, here's our bad boy, here's our mostly bad boy, and here's our smoothed out guy, which is okay. This is from Synodcon. They're trying to oversimplifying it. But we have to increase bit depth and frequency and sampling rate, right? But if we have a choice of the two, which is better? If we have to lose one, would we lose sampling rate or would we lose bit depth? Yeah, most likely sampling rate, because we lose some high end, maybe we can figure out how to do something, right? Which has most effect on the file size? Bit depth or sampling rate? Sampling rate does. Double the sampling rate, double the number of samples, no matter what your quantization is, and your file size doubles. But if you go up 8 bits, if you go from 8 to 16, 16 to 24, you increase the resolution humongously, right? So let's see, let's do it from 8 to 24. From 8 to 24, we go from 65,000 little intervals to 17 million little intervals. And we only increase the file size by about 13%, right? So that's a big issue with how we go forward, how we do what we're going to do, because we only have pipes that are so big, we've got to push them somewhere, we've got to store them somewhere, right? Sampling rate is big influence on the file size. Let's see, what else have I got to talk about? So, why would you want to do that to a perfectly good analog audio signal? Well, there are a couple of reasons, yes, I'll admit. And one is, it's nonlinear. You don't have to rock the tape machines back and forth anymore, right? To find a place to edit. It's accessible. Every freaking body has digital, right? Everything's digital. This is digital. In fact, this isn't even a telephone.